Hi, I'm Tom Scherberger of the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, and I'm here today with James McHale, Professor and Chair of Psychology and Director of the Family Study Center at USF St. Petersburg, and Maureen Waller, Associate Professor of Policy Analysis and Management at Cornell University. They are guest editors for a special section of the journal Family Process on the topic of co-parenting in fragile families. This is an especially important and timely moment to examine this topic, and the special section will be of interest not just to the Family Process readership, but to family researchers, clinicians, and policymakers at a national level. To introduce the special edition, I've asked Drs. McHale and Waller to join me to address a few questions about the special section. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Dr. Waller, the first main question is, what are fragile families, and what are some of the important things we have been learning about them?
Well, economist Ron Mincy actually coined the term fragile families in the 1990s to describe a new type of family that was emerging that was being formed outside of marriage. And Ron was actually a program officer at the Ford Foundation at the time when he first started talking about this. And he thought that policymakers should be concerned about fragile families because, well, first because they were becoming more and more common, particularly in disadvantaged communities, but second because they seem to have a very high risk for poverty and family dissolution. So just to put this in some perspective, in 1970, about 1 out of 10 births occurred to unmarried women, and that compares to about 2 out of 5 births today. And some research that came out last year shows that for the first time, a majority of births to young women, so women under age 30, actually occurred to women who weren't married. But our information about fragile families has grown a lot over the last decade or so. For example, information from the Fragile Family Study, which is the first national study of unmarried parents and their children, shows that unmarried parents are indeed much more disadvantaged than married parents in a number of respects. For example, they're younger, they have less education, higher rates of poverty. They're also disproportionately African American and Latino. Unmarried parents also have more risk factors than married parents that we might be concerned about. So, for example, they're more likely to experience depression, to report drug and alcohol problems, and to report intimate partner violence. Unmarried fathers also have what I would consider to be alarmingly high rates of incarceration. We've also learned a lot more about relationships in fragile families, and I think one of the most striking findings from the Fragile Family Study when it first began was that about half of unmarried parents were living together when their child was born. So there seemed to be a lot of two-parent families early on, but the study follows families over time. And within about 5 years or so, most unmarried parents have ended their romantic relationships, and just a small minority, maybe about 15 or 16%, have married. So, there's a lot of research now looking at factors that help us understand why some parents have stable unions and others break up, as well as why some unmarried fathers appear to be very highly involved with their children while others disengage early on. It's just been a lot more recently that researchers have started paying attention to the role of co-parenting in fragile families, both in situations where parents are continuing to live in the same household and when parents, usually the father, is living in a different household.
Dr. McHale, the Family Process readership will likely be familiar with the concept of co-parenting because of its roots in structural family theory. But for those not familiar with your framework and research on co-parenting and child development in diverse family systems, can you say a few words about what co-parenting is and why it's relevant for an understanding of family dynamics in fragile family systems?
Appreciate that question. It really speaks to the crux of why this topic's an important one on the national scene today. The essence of co-parenting for family theorists and practitioners is the one that Salvador Minuchin articulated in his lifetime of work with families across the socioeconomic spectrum. Co-parenting refers to the degree of support and solidarity in the parenting alliance that develops between the two or more adults who share responsibility for the child's care and upbringing. Once upon a time, we used the word co-parenting to refer only to the ongoing parenting relationship that continued between parents post-divorce. And that changed almost 30 years ago now when developmental psychologists were scolded by Patricia Minuchin in an influential article in the journal Child Development, came to realize that co-parenting dynamics evolve in all family systems, They operate in divorced families and in two-parent nuclear families headed by gay or straight parents, and in multi-generational family systems, and apropos to this special section, in unmarried fragile families, where the parents may or may not ever have had a sustained romantic relationship of any duration. So it's not whether a co-parenting system exists. It does by virtue of the child being born of two parents. The question is how it functions. So with good, regular child-directed communications and mutual investment in and liking of the child, and cooperation as opposed to antagonism or disengagement, attunement to the child's needs above all, and ways of adapting creatively and with teamwork to developmental and other crises. These features can occur in co-parenting systems regardless of what the actual family structure is, and certainly they can evolve in fragile family systems. I always recommend people think triangle. Co-parenting relationships always involve at least two co-parenting adults, and sometimes more. The link between the co-parenting adults with respect to the child or the children is what's the most important. So it would be possible for a terrific fatherhood program to equip dads with all the skills they need to be a better, more involved dad, but that would not inevitably promote better co-parenting. It may not have an impact on co-parenting at all, or it might conceivably even make co-parenting worse if the now more involved dad and the mom did not communicate and coordinate well as co-parents. So, many of the wonderful, responsible fatherhood and marriage and relationship enhancement initiatives of the past 2 decades have improved parenting or enhanced marital relationship functioning, but very few have actually trained their focus on co-parenting, even when no committed couple relationship exists. And so this is where the special section really takes its starting point.
Dr. Waller, I mentioned that this issue is likely to be of interest to national policymakers. From a policy perspective, why is this a critical time to consider co-parenting in fragile families?
Well, recently there's really been a lot of attention to how children growing up in fragile families are faring. There's also been major initiatives at the federal level, which Dr. McHale mentioned, to promote healthy marriage, to promote responsible fatherhood. A lot less attention really has been given to how parents can strengthen their co-parenting relationships, but there's some reason to think that this might be changing. Last year, there was a proposal at the federal level to revise the statutory purposes of the child support program to encourage parents not only to support their children, but to cooperate with one another. The proposal also asks states to include parenting time provisions in all new child support orders. And it's estimated that about 1 out of 4 children in the U.S. participate in the child support program right now. We know a lot of those children are living in fragile families. So, we don't know if this proposal is going forward or not, but as more discussion takes place about how do we encourage parents to cooperate with each other, how do we integrate parenting plan arrangements into the process of establishing a child support order, this might be a really great opportunity to shift our focus to co-parenting. At the same time, I think we need to know more about how to strengthen co-parenting in families formed outside of marriage and how to do this early on before there's a lot of conflict in parents' relationships. So this is one of the things that we were thinking about when we decided to put together this special issue.
Dr. McHale, what are some of the key issues addressed in the articles in the special section?
It's a pretty terrific sampling of some of the important work that's underway out there. It includes papers by Natasha Cabrera, Jay Fagan, and their colleagues, and by Maureen Waller, examining some of what we've been learning from large national samples that have enrolled fragile families. Cabrera and her colleagues report on over 5,000 children and families from the early childhood longitudinal studies birth cohort. They found that for both cohabiting and married families, conflicted co-parenting interfered with kids' social competencies and academic skills, and that collaborative co-parenting promoted school readiness. Waller reported on almost 2,700 unmarried participants in the Fragile Families and Child Wellbeing Study, and she found that for families with cooperative or mixed co-parenting styles, fathers remain involved when parents work together and support one another's parenting efforts, even if they argue frequently in doing so. At the same time, she found that in poorer quality co-parenting relationships, conflict did matter for declines in father involvement. So again, speaking to the importance of understanding co-parenting. The measures of co-parenting in these two large-scale studies were somewhat limited, but the fact that conceptually meaningful and significant findings nonetheless surfaced prompts us to take an even closer look at factors that promote risk resilience in co-parenting among unmarried parents. Also included in the special section are qualitative studies by Linda Burton and Cecily Hardaway and by Vicki Gaskin-Butler and her colleagues, broadening the lens of how we look at co-parenting in fragile families in necessary ways. Rather than limiting the frame to just the child's mother and father, both research teams address a reality that's often overlooked, that there are also other individuals rightfully also considered co-parents in many fragile family systems. So Burton and Hardaway's report is a study of other mothers, the female partners of children's fathers who in some cases are thrust into a parenting role with the father's children. Gaskin-Butler's study of expectant first-time African-American mothers indicates that not only fathers but also maternal grandmothers are expected co-parents in women's prenatal representations. And in some cases, both mothers and fathers and grandmothers are expected to play formative roles. Multi-person co-parenting systems were actually the norm among the women in Gaskin-Butler's study, which challenges us to broaden how we think about and understand co-parenting systems in fragile families. And the last report, one that I co-authored with Maureen Waller and with Jessica Pearson at the Center for Policy Research, provides a review of interventions designed to support co-parenting. We also take a look at related work from access and visitation programs for non-residential fathers and marriage and relationship enhancement programs for low-income couples. The main thrust is on some of the newer programs for fragile families designed to support co-parenting per se, but right now there aren't many of those yet, so there's still much work to be done in that growing field. And the paper ends with some recommendations that we've intended to serve as a blueprint for future work in this field.
That's fascinating. Unfortunately, we only have a minute or two left before we have to close, and I wanted to see if either of you have any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share with readers of the special section. Dr. Waller?
Well, I want to thank you very much for talking to us today, and I also want to thank Family Process for putting out this special issue. I guess my hope is that the articles are going to provide some insight into what co-parenting looks like and means to unmarried parents and their children, and also help inform some policy discussions that are going on right now. A lot of our policies and programs were designed more for situations where parents were married to each other or they had been married and subsequently divorced. And when this research on fragile families was just emerging, Ron Mincy raised some really, I think, important questions about whether policies and interventions which were designed for married and previously married parents would be appropriate for unmarried parents. And I think so we now know that unmarried parents do have some unique challenges. We also know that there's a diversity among unmarried parents that we need to pay attention to when we're thinking about how to design effective co-parenting interventions.
Dr. McHale?
Amen to everything there. And I would just encourage people to not just read the special section, but also begin thinking about this field through the eyes of the family systems thinker. I think if we all view co-parenting through the eyes that Mnuchin might, we will be several steps closer to creating the kinds of programs and policies that will benefit kids and their families. All kids profit when the adults who are responsible for their care and upbringing are communicating, cooperating, and collaborating. We hope a great many more people will begin viewing families through the lens of the contributors to the special section, and that more systems-oriented thinkers will consider the roles that they might play in helping to advance this really, really important new field of study.
Thanks to you both for being with us today. The special section promises to help stretch our current thinking about several important and understudied family process issues and advance the critically important dialogue about how best to support and strengthen fragile family systems. For more information on the special issue, please visit www.familyprocess.org.